Hello and welcome to the 5th installment of the ARCHLine.XP online architectural courses. Let's scratch that. This is the 6th time that we meet. Time flies so fast. My name is Zoltán Tóth, your CAD enthusiast slash partner manager for ARCHLine.XP. So what we are going to do today is what we did last week as well. We are going to look at how to create this very nice 2-story family house, part of a larger terraced building. And this time we are going to look at rendering, because there's no way to get around to it. We have to create our own visuals now. Just a quick reminder, last time we looked at the material settings and we enriched our floor plan with some nice content. We downloaded some deck chairs and parasols and we defined some nice materials. But now it's time to move one step forward. So now we have to create the visuals and get to this stage somehow. Today's session is all about visuals. If you have any questions during the show regarding the things that I'm showing you, then you can ask them on the right hand side or below this video in the chat bar. And at the end we are going to talk about that too. So when we are finished with this session of today, then the last thing what we are going to do is tomorrow we have another wrap-up session where we look at ARCHLine.XP Live, which is, as you know, the external renderer, but for now we are going to mainly deal with the internal one. So the first thing that we have to look at is how do we even create a render? And that's what we are investigating now. So this is the project where we left off yesterday. We have this nice furnishing and it's time to create our first render, which we go with the integrated render. Now the integrated render, what it does is that first we define the resolution. I think this widescreen would be fine, and then we have to define what kind of background we want to do. I think a panorama would be fine. Let's see what we have here. We have certain panoramas you can toggle between. And then we can just turn on the render frame, which is actually the frame that you see. Those green numbers, they show what is the area that you actually see. Let me just hide the project navigator so that way I can show you what I mean. Let me just hide it, just like that. So you see the gray area is not going to be in my render. The highlighted area is going to be part of it. So let's just now start the renderer and see what we can achieve. Okay, integrated render again. The best part of the integrated renderer that this is going to be running in a window which you can tie to the rest of the drawing. The renderer loads up for a second, so you see now I have it added as an extra viewport, and now the renderer loads for a minute and then the project appears. Now the thing is, and the great thing about the integrated renderer is that if you move your model, then the renderer would update as well. So you see that the resolution is not that good, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's just supposed to be a very quick renderer. So if you zoom into things, you see that that the renderer changes with the model. In fact, if I change the material for this railing to this glass, oh wait a second, I think this is the best time to actually show you the render styles, which I can do by going to the navigator and pull up these styles. Now, what are render styles? You might think that these things at the left are materials. They are not. They are functions for materials. You see chrome, fabric, emissive, transparent, glass-like surfaces, and the way it works is that you just have to drag and drop these things onto surfaces, and then the surfaces would take these kind of functions. So if you want to say that that particular element should be a wall, because that's the way it's supposed to be, it should have the same material properties as a wall or that glass. I think it's better to show you there. Yep. So it used to be frosted, now it's transparent. Let's put it back to frosted again. So you see that on the real-time renderer it updates automatically, so that way you can define how your surface should look like. Let's add a wall surface over there for good measure. That's right. And I think some kind of let's see what else we can hype up here. I think a metallic surface, a ceiling for the ceiling part. Yep. And I think my metals are not set up yet. It's more often than not your materials are already highlighted with a render style, but just to be safe you can override that. And for this we have a color coded view. Now the color coded view shows you what are the elements that already have render style and what are the elements that don't. So following the colors you can see if you have forgotten about anything. In this case the water I think is already figured out, but the metal surfaces are not good. That leather over there is not, well, should it be a metal surface or should it be maybe a chrome-like surface? This is more about trying what is the best outcome. Let's just drag and drop the chrome one. you see that it's being recolored in the colored view, and also on the renderer, it's taking up the right outlook. Fabric over there, yeah, much better, much better. So I think once we have set up the views, we see that the renderer complies with the changes. Now, perspectives we have already talked about in brief, so I'm not going to bore you with that, but you need to know how to be able to toggle between these things. And one thing, if we remember how the renderer looked like, one thing that we haven't figured out is the sunlight. I am not entirely sure if all of you have realized, but the shadows were all wrong on my model. I think I can show you somehow. Let me just rotate my model, and then you see that on the panorama we had a sun over there, but the shadows are all wrong. You see that the sun is coming from behind, and the shadows are going also to the behind, and that's not good. So we have to figure that out somehow. We have to modify that. We already set up the north location and the north direction, so this might interfere with that. But the Heliodon tool is a very good tool to actually give a customized lighting pattern to your drawing. Now you might say that this is cheating, and you might be right, but visualization is all about the artistic result. So we have to find the best possible illusion of the realistic space. We are going for photorealism, so we have to move the sun because we have the power for that. So even if it conflicts with the north direction that we have set up, we are able to sort of align the sun with the panorama, and I think this result is much better. Now let me just put up the render. Yeah, I think it's a bit better. I might need to move the shadow a bit further later on, but this is a much better result because now it's not actually in conflict with what reality actually is. So with those axes, you can move things, and you can enable and disable the Heliodon from the view tool anytime you want. Much better result. See how fast the integrated renderer reacts, and that's the result we wanted to achieve. Now I think it's time to move back into materials again just a little bit and talk about how to color certain elements, because that's something what you asked about, and I have to talk about this separately, because when you color something, then the whole surface of the element would be recolored, but sometimes that's not good enough for you. Let's look at this elevation. If I want to recolor that elevation part with this kind of brick texture, let's just find it. And if I want to drag and drop it onto the surface, let's just find I think it was stone wall something. That was another copy of the texture, that's why I wasn't using that. So if I add it onto this surface, you see that that's not good. The whole slab took up this texture, and that's not what I need. Let's just go to the properties, see what happened here. What is happening here is that the side material of the slab is changed, and that's not the result what I'm looking for. So let me just undo this and drag and drop this material again onto this surface. And this time I don't want it to go around the building, so let me just drag and drop and add it as painting, because if you add it as painting, then only that particular face would be covered and nothing else. Let's just demonstrate what that means. If I go to the properties, I see that the material is still bright white, so that hasn't changed, but it looks like a brick surface. Same for the walls. But be warned, this also means that the render styles have been rewritten. So now I have to go back to the render styles and find you see that it's a different color. That means that it doesn't have the right render style. Grab the wall and drop it onto the surface, and that way it would look the way it's supposed to look. Okay, I think we are now satisfied with this result. Bottom line, this is how you change elements. Now let's talk about color cards. Now what are color cards even? Color cards are able to store color alternatives to your model. Very hard to explain, better shown. So let's say that we have this stone surface. What happens if you want to imagine it with a different kind of surface? So what happens if you want to make it, toggle between white and brick and other elements at will, right? So how do we do that? The way it's supposed to work is that we are going to pick one single surface, and we are going to make alternatives for that. And for that we have the color card tool, which is able to gather certain elements of different materials and demonstrate how that works. Just give me 1 second. I need to load up a different version of the project. Here we go. So what do is that we have this element over here. Let's just go back to right click and find material, and here I have it already set up, but I'm just going to replace that with something else so that way I can show you how it works. So let's just go with bright white. I think bright would be spelled like this. Materials, and yeah, let's just look for this, and I'm just going to replace this on this object like that. Okay, so this is where we start, and we want to make alternatives for this wall element. How do we do that? First, let's find the material which would be our base material. That should be stone wall. That one, I have multiple copies. So once I have pulled up the material, instead of just dragging and dropping in here, we click on the cogwheel and we say create a copy as a color card. Now let's hit OK and name it somehow. So this is going to be architectural webinar color card. I'm always torn between how to spell it, with a U or without a U. It depends where you are from. Now this is where we start. This material is part of the package, but clicking on the plus icon I can add additional ones to it. So let's add this brick white as an alternative, and let's have another alternative. Maybe this should be something like whitish material, so that should be bright white, I think. So I'm just going to look for it here. Okay, another maybe a plaster like surface. I'm not that good with colors, to be honest. It's always my wife who comes in here and tells me how my models should look like, because to be honest, colors are secondary for me. But a fawn brown, this looks very nice. So let's just hit OK, and now this color turned into a color card. So I'm just going to drag and drop this onto the surface and replace one material with the other one, and let's just choose which one we want to use. This one, for example, and there you go. And now, sorry, the whole surface was changed. So let's just do it some other way. Let's remember where this is. This is what happens if you have all the surfaces, sorry, not a styling. If you have all the surfaces selected to the same material. Let's just do it like this. And now we're going to back to the color card. Yep, I think this is fine. So I'm just going to choose it like that. And here we go. Now, this is one way to do it. So you can just, drag your material, drop it there, and you just choose whichever you want. Or you can just go back to the color card itself and click on this toggle, and that way you can see the different versions of the color card appearing. So this is very good for making color alternatives, right? So imagine that you sit down with your client and you start with this stone wall number 048, and you might want to show alternatives, and you go to brick white, and your client says, yeah, but that's fine, but maybe I do not want this elevation to be separately colored as the other. So you just click bright white, going back to the default one, or you just want to toggle between the different choices that you have. So that way you can very fast way you can show the result for your clients. So that's how you manually control multiple instances of the same material. But that still doesn't explain one thing, and that is, how do we get materials into the model? So how do we get a new things like that into the model? Last time we added a solar panel, and for that we used a custom material, but that's still not the same story. So this time I'm going to show you a different workflow, and for that I have a web browser in which I have found a nice texture of what I want to use. Okay, so how do we use this in here? Very simple. We go back to the materials and we go to this cogwheel and we create a new material. So what we do is that we go back to our browser, right click on this image and say copy image, going back to the software, and paste it. We have to name it somehow, so this is going to be architectural webinar brick pattern, and it's by the way, it's seamless. It looks very good. I already tried this one. Physical properties. Now I need to define the size of this this element. Okay, how do we know how big this should be? Now this is where some calculation comes into the picture, because we saw that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bricks in this direction, and this is a square, so this size and that size should be the same. So how do we know how big this should be? Now, I should ask Ilish because he's the architect, but since he's not at my disposal right now, he's busy answering the questions. And I need to know how big these bricks are. So this is when research comes in. So I say small brick size, and I know that this should be 225 millimeters. So I'm just going to pop up the calculator, 225 times 5, so this should be 1125 millimeters. And if we add the material between the elements, like these things, mortar I think is called, then this size checks out. So I'm going to say that this is tiled, so I'm not going to stretch it on a surface. Instead I'm going to tile it. Appearance. Now this I have to set up because by default this is going to be a general material, which in this preview we can see is not what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to do the drop down. Notice that these are, in fact, yes, you guessed it, these are the render styles again, our good old friends. So I'm just going to say this is a wall, and I see that it updates much better in sunlight. It looks much more realistic. So I'm just going to go a quick reminder. Hatch in 3D means, you have guessed it, how the hatch is going to look like on a 3D surface. So if we make an elevation plan, that's what it governs, how it looks like. Hatch on section will show you how the material should look like on a section. But for now, we are not going to change them. So I'm just going to go OK. And here, let me just find a good surface onto which I can copy paste this, maybe onto this fence, sorry. I'm just going to grab it, paste it, and modify it on this object. There you go. So that way you can have a very nice industrial looking fence over here. So that way you can bring in additional elements into the software. Obviously we are encouraging people to find new and exciting sources from where you can bring in elements. Use whichever is best for your purposes. Now, having said everything about color cards and materials that are to be said, let's look at the other things which would make renders interesting, and those are handling lamps, because we have realized that material and light settings are the things which are making a render good. So let's just see what happens with lamps. Now, when it comes to using lamps and light sources, let me just go back to the original one. Yeah, and there I want to have a ceiling lamp. So how do I position that? We have a library from which you can pick the bright lamp that you're looking for. Let's just go to lighting, and I'm going to go find one ceiling lamp. I think that one should be good. I think ceiling lamp number 3 would be good. I'm just dragging and dropping it onto the 3D surface, and it nicely snaps to the bottom of the structure. You might see that this is not accurate, so I just did some approximations. I'm just going back to the 2D, which that's the reason why I haven't closed it, and I'm snapping to the middle angles. That's right, and now I can snap it the way it's supposed to be. Okay, let's investigate what makes a lamp. You might see on the 3D it's dimly lit. Now I can't see that properly in the sunlight, but you see that it's on. So why is this a lamp? What makes it into a lamp? So if I select it, I see that it has a toggle up there, based on which I can not only set up the lamp's physical sizes and properties and base elevation, I can also jump to the light source. So if you have this jump list, that means that this element is a lamp, in fact. If I select that light bulb, I'm able to move this time not the lamp itself, but the light source. So if you want to offset it a bit, if you want to move it a little bit back, then that's the way to do it. Let me just revert it back the way it's supposed to be. How do we access the properties of the light source is the next thing you might want to ask, because you might want to change it. You might want to increase its intensity. So I'm just going to go to its menu. I think it's in the context menu, and it should be there. Just a second. If I select its properties, you see that this is not the way you can set it up, because here you can only set up the line weights and other properties. There's another sub menu for this. I'm just going to go there. Modifying the light sources up here. So if I go edit light source, then the lamp is here again with one light source on the left hand side, what you can see, and you can add additional ones by clicking on the add button, and here you can access the libraries that we have, and IES lights are the ones I want to talk about, because these are manufacturer made light sources, and the manufacturer actually scans the light pattern and saves it into an image which the software is able to read and reproduce. So if you're looking for realistic lights, then this is the way to go. Manufacturers' websites usually have downloadable content for this. I'm not going to change this for now because I'm satisfied with one single ceiling lamp. I just want to show you that if you download something from the 3D warehouse, which I'm not doing now, but we did it last time, then the element should have that light bulb icon in it. And if once it has the light bulb, it means that this element has a light source. You can change that, you can move that, you can add additional lamps to it, but bottom line is, if an element has items or names such as chandelier, lamp, ceiling lamp, pendant lamp, etc., the software would automatically assign a light source to it. So that's a very important mark to make here. The software is able to recognize these elements. And now we move on to finalizing the renders. We did some preliminary renders. We didn't have time to sort of boost them, but now I'm going to show them how that's done. So this is the model that we have here, and we have the perspectives. We already talked about that. We are just going to make sure that our current viewpoint is the right size and the right angle. And we go to rendering, but this time it's going to be a standalone rendering, but also we are starting with a draft. We always start with a draft. We want to save time, right? So we want to make sure that we are not investing too much time into a rendered image when things are bound to change, because they are usually. So for example, now I see the shadows are good, but if I want to change them, then I don't want to restart the rendering. So that's why the draft is good as a preliminary solution. For example, now I'm changing the angle where I'm looking at. If this happens, by the way, the panorama is visible about the model, not that's just a loading issue. The software need to have enough time to recalculate the model. Okay, let's find the right angle, like this. I think this is good. Let's going back to the renderer. And now I'm just going to change the resolution once the renderer loads. So first I have to go with exterior quick render. There you go. And then the software recalculates again and starts to render the image, this time with another set of settings, which I can later on fine tune. I'm not going to do that right now, but first thing what you have to set up is the render quality, which we just did. And then once this thing loads, we are going to change the resolution for an HD image, because then it would be a bit more presentable. So let's just do it. There we go. It's just about done. And when it's done, I can save it now. I'm not going to do it. Instead, I'm just going to fine tune it a bit. So let me just zoom in and mess around with the exposure. Now, these are the settings, these are the effects that you can implement. I don't want to implement that too much because then I can have the bad result, but the bottom line is that here you can fine tune the end result even when the renderer is running. Clicking on the icon itself would reset the sliders, but that is how you can fine tune the result. I think this should be good, so let's just change the resolution to something larger. And here we go. Let's hit the play button and run it. On hindsight, I might have too much excess things on this render. The neighboring buildings, for example, I might not need them that much. And yeah, some details could have been done a little bit better, but I think for my purposes this should be good. Okay, let's talk about how renderers are done and how you could manage the content. Now, you might see that what I see right now is being rendered, but the things which are behind me or the things which are out of the frame are rendered too. Now, why is that? That is because the software doesn't know what I see or not see, or it cannot be sure if the elements which are out of the picture have any effect on my model. For example, they might cast a shadow. They might make reflections. So the software is, just to be sure, calculates with everything and renders everything. So if you want to sort of filter down your model, then you can do that using the layer walk I showed you during the earlier sessions. That way you can filter down your model. You don't want to spend too much time on things that you don't need anyway. Because rendering is all about the processing power. There are two things which are being worked here extensively, and one is the CPU, your processor, and the other one is your RAM, your memory. And especially the CPU is the one which is put to the test over here. So this process is all about calculating how light touches your model and how the materials react to the sunlight itself. So let me just show you real quick something. I have one video over here which I can show you. If you go online and find ARCHLine.XP system requirements, then you can find a video where me and Ilyas are explaining what are the different hardware that you should be using. So if you want to create renders faster than what I'm doing right now, then you have to know which hardware you should be investing in. What makes a good CPU, what makes a good RAM, what you need is actually things that we already talked about. So if you want to make sure that you have the right gear, then you can just look up this video and find the right answers there. I think our rendering is just about be done. So when it's done, I'm going to save it. But the question comes is that I don't want to sit here and do renderings, right? I have multiple images, multiple viewports I want to render. How do I make them quickly? And that's what we are going to talk about next. But before that, let me just wait until this is done and save my model. I mean, save my image. And that way I can have something I can send to my clients right away. Next time when we meet, actually, I will talk about how to make this much easier with live. But for now, for the sake of the story, let's look at this scenario. So I'm just going to find another path, because by default this image is going to be saved onto my document. I'm just moving my screen to another screen just for a second. I'm finding the right path for the webinar. Just 1 second, and I'm going to be saving this image, and that way you end up with something. Let me just find it real quick. Yeah. And then the image would be saved into a JPEG file. And there you go. So it's nothing flashy. That's what I could have done in a few hours, but you get the idea. So that's how you get the visual. If you want to fine tune it, you can. You can go back to your model and you can fine tune the materials, the angles, the sunlight. But let's talk about instead how to make a render list, because I talked about this briefly, that ARCHLine is all about setting up the right perspectives. If the perspectives are believable, then you're on the right track. So the perspectives that you have already set up are available from the rendering window, and you can render all of them. That's a no-brainer. But how do you render this view and the next view and the next view without having to be sitting next to your computer? Rendering takes a lot of time and effort, so you don't want to spend too much time on your computer. Instead, you want to let it roll, maybe for a night. So let's say that image is already done. There you go. So that is already created. So there's hence the green check mark. But all the other views haven't been created yet. So if I enable them and put them into sort of a queue, like let me just click on them. And once I hit start, I'm not going to do it. It's going to take too much time. I don't want to do that. Then the renderers would be done one by one. So the software does one rendered image with the resolution you define, and another one, and another one, and another one until it's done. So that's about the rendered images. Let's just go back to the project that we have here, and let me cheat for a second, because to be honest, one of my colleagues who's very good with renders and models did a finalized version of this project. So let's just take a look around and then see the final results, because this is a bit further away from what we have done, but basically what you see here is just rinse and repeat. So the things that I've done should be just repeated, and the result should be this. So reminder, the elements are coming from internal sources, such as our own project library or object library, or the 3D warehouse, or beamobject.com, or Synchronia, or our own showroom. So the thing is that once you have the right material, right elements, and the right views, that's the most important thing, then you have something like this. So you end up with a very nice finished and furnished location, just like that. I like the orange bow, by the way. That was such a nice touch. And as a final remark, let me just pull up the image library, and this is what you end up with. So it takes time to learn how to make a good rendering. Even I'm doing some learning right now. But bottom line is that once you have the right lights and the right material settings, then the result should be a stunning one like this one. Now these are all made with our own integrated rendering engine. Not to mention that ARCHLine does have connection to other third-party rendering engines, and also ARCHLine.XP Live, of course. If you want to use the internal rendering engine, then this is the end result, what you should be getting at. And then we get to the difficult part. You already know how to work in CAD, and you already know that working in high polygon models with many surfaces makes work a bit more difficult, and rendering would take longer time. And that is exactly what ARCHLine.XP Live is supposed to help you with. So that is what we are going to cover next time when we look at the same location, same settings, But this time we are going to use a different model of rendering, a different method, a different solution, which would make things efficiently, in a fast manner, and in a very convenient manner. I always tell my colleagues that working in ARCHLine.XP Live feels like working in a video game, because it's very easy and effortless. Let's just go back to the project, because I think I have a couple of questions over here. Let me just very quickly renew them. I think my colleague Ilyes is doing a very good job at answering the questions, but for the sake of record, I'm going to read them out. So that was a question about how to import site panoramas, and if you can import site panoramas, is there an easy way to take these? And Ilyes just mentioned that the raw 360 background HDR panoramas are likely to be around 1 GB, and they are extremely huge and very difficult to work with. So if you need to use an image manipulator, then you need to use one to decrease the size of a manageable size to work with. And also, one thing you have noticed that the sun was always at the same place when I was moving my model, because the panorama needs to be rotated as well. If you have a panoramic image at your disposal, because you downloaded it somehow or from other sources, then here you can load it up with the panorama, custom panorama, and there you can load it. Okay, the next one. If you have texture mapped on components, for example on a window, what happens when we remove the window to the left or right? Will it retain the texture mapped after it is moved in relation to the walls? Yes, it does actually. It does. It's following, the material would follow with the model itself. There was a question about the hardware. What makes let me just look up the question itself. What is my PC configuration I'm using right now? Which NVIDIA graphic card model are you using? I can look up the system specs, but instead it's not something that, so there's no golden rule for this. So it's not like there's one configuration that works for everybody. Instead, you should be focusing on a strong CPU and RAM. Like I mentioned, in our website, there's a system requirements section with a video, and that explains everything you need to know about these specifics. There's another question. That's an interesting one. I think I briefly mentioned that, but it's better safe than sorry. I know that it is very different, the color on PC and the color on the wall. Is it possible? If yes, how to give informations to our paint shop so as to start the trials? Continue. With a color nearby to what our clients saw. I think that's something that needs to be more clarification for my part, because I'm not exactly sure what you mean. You need, for example, RAL colors, or you need to have the exact color code. If so, let me know. Another thing, it will be nice to keep options of each render to revert back to earlier ones for customers to compare and confirm on the color scheme. Again, I think with the color scheme, the best way to go is the color card. So you could potentially make different rendered images for your clients of all the color card variations. Depends if your project justifies the time that you're spending on that. Another question, there are many. I'm happy about that. So have to create a tutorial on how to create material libraries. I think we just did. One extra stage is for that. Is that when you're saving something, you have to be more careful about. Let me just show you real quick. So when you're saving something, I'm not going to save it, but here the subcategories are the ones which would govern where the material is going to be locked. Regarding the earlier asked color representation settings, I already talked about this, but it's just a refresher. Here in the navy bar, you have the representation style. And consistent color and realistic would be the best sort of toggles to illustrate what happens if you, for example, go with a realistic. Then you see that this color and that one, even though the texture is the same, don't look the same. So if you want to have a color faithful representation, that you should go with consistent color, and that way result would be much better. Another question, beside the mouse interface, can a game controller be used to maneuver to the view to in the rendered model? Well, no, that's not really the way to go. CAD is traditionally is done with a mouse with a wheel, and I think that's the most convenient way to do it. Just a quick refresher: scrolling out is going away from the model, scrolling in is going closer. Right click, holding the right click, you can move around, and holding the shift key and the scroll wheel, you can move orbit around your model. So double click is going to fit the model to screen. Yeah, another question. There was a question about plot stamps. I don't see the question, but yeah, here we go. I have drawn my plot stamp at ARCHLine as 2D drawing. How I insert it on my plots? And by the way, is it possible to have attributes, name of customer, etc.? Answer from Ilish. Thank you very much for that, Ilish. Yes, you can create and use your own plot stamps. Simply draw it as a group and save it. When assembling your layout, you are free to choose it. You can use the fill tool to fill it up. Yesterday, I demonstrated it. Not yesterday, I think last week. Whenever I talked about plot layouts, I think that's the one where I talked about briefly how to use groups for these purposes. Another question, color matching screen to reality is dangerous and could potentially give you problems with your client if they get different result in my reality to what you have shown on screen. Yeah, thanks Nigel for that input. That actually happens. So that's always a question. How far do you want your clients to be involved with the design process? Whenever I talk about the color variations, the color cards, I always say to my clients that this is a very good way to show your clients that this is how the potential results should look like. Some of my clients say that this is actually a very good idea because then the clients can see right away what happens and they can come up with their own ideas. Some other designers, on the other hand, are saying that's not the way it's supposed to be because then the design process goes on and on for a long time, because if clients are engaged, then they are entertained and then they want to, you know, take part in the design process. If you want it or don't want it, that's up to your personal preferences. Yeah, and that is actually what we wanted to discuss today regarding how to create a render. So we came a long way from our sad looking model to this one. Again, thank you very much for all my colleagues who helped me realizing this, because rendering is always a process. You have to learn the tiny tips and tricks, because you might end up with something beautiful but not realistic at all. Remember how we move the sun, because we have the power over that. So realism and being faithful to the original circumstances might not go hand in hand, but you are going to go for the best possible result and the more stunning one. And that is what we are going to discuss tomorrow at the last session of our ARCHLine architectural courses, when we look at ARCHLine.XP Live, which is the renderer which might turn from this model to something else. Let me just find yeah. So this is what we are going to end up with tomorrow. So again, thank you very much for your attention. If you like this video, like it and subscribe to the channel, and see you tomorrow.